The Lancaster Square Memorial Garden possessed that particular quality of municipal tranquility that made even the most contentious horticultural debates seem like gentle philosophy. On this October afternoon, the Flaxborough Garden Preservation Society had arranged their folding chairs in a respectful semicircle around the stone bird bath, where 7 devoted citizens prepared to wrestle with the eternal question of autumn bulb placement. Mrs. Millicent Cordwainer, the Society's secretary, consulted her notebook with the gravity of someone recording history. She was a woman who had discovered that committee work consisted largely of sitting upright, taking notes, and allowing other people's enthusiasms to exhaust themselves naturally. Item 4, she announced, concerns the daffodil display for the eastern border. The assembled members settled into the familiar rhythm of civic discourse. Mrs. Cora Brindle, resplendent in a burgundy coat that had weathered 3 decades of committee meetings, advocated for King Alfred varieties with the confidence of someone who had never met a bulb she couldn't improve. Mr. Lionel Peel, the Society's treasurer, countered with observations about soil drainage that drew thoughtful nods from 2 junior members conscripted from the Women's Institute. Miss Maud Beasley, who approached all public spaces with the wariness of someone expecting moral decline, kept her handbag clutched firmly on her lap. It was during this exchange that Mrs. Cordwainer rose to retrieve her pen, which had rolled beneath the memorial bench with the inconsiderate timing of inanimate objects everywhere. The bronze plaque set into the weathered stone caught her attention immediately, and she found herself staring with the expression of someone confronting an unexpected alteration to the natural order. "I say," she interrupted, her voice carrying genuine puzzlement, "has anyone noticed the Hartnell Memorial?" 7 pairs of eyes turned toward the modest bronze plaque embedded in the garden's central bench, where for years it had displayed the respectable green patina of municipal neglect. It now gleamed with the warm luster of careful attention. The inscription, previously barely legible beneath accumulated verdigris, now proclaimed with startling clarity, "Evangeline Hartnell, beloved widow, 1889–1943. More striking still, a small bouquet of fresh violets had been placed directly beneath the polished bronze, their deep purple petals vivid against the weathered stone. Mrs. Brindle adjusted her spectacles with the air of someone reassessing fundamental assumptions. "Well, that's rather extraordinary. I could have sworn that plaque was quite tarnished last week." "More than tarnished," confirmed Mr. Peel, whose methodical memory served him well in matters of municipal inventory. "It's been green as copper roofing for as long as I've attended these meetings. And those violets, they're certainly expensive ones." The Society members gathered around the memorial with the cautious interest of people encountering something that didn't quite conform to their understanding of proper procedure. Miss Dorothy Finch, the Society's newest member, ventured the obvious question with the bravery of someone not yet trained in Flaxborough's preference for indirect inquiry. "Does anyone know who might have done this? Perhaps there are surviving family members?" A thoughtful silence settled over the group. Mrs. Cordwainer, who possessed 43 years of comprehensive local knowledge, shook her head slowly. "I don't recall any Hartnells in recent memory. My late husband mentioned them occasionally, said they owned several properties around the square before the war, but I rather thought the family had died out." Mr. Peel nodded agreement. "The name doesn't appear on our membership rolls, and I've been treasurer for 8 years. People who tend family graves usually make themselves known, if only to coordinate with our maintenance schedule." It was then that Mrs. Cordwainer made the second discovery. Moving toward the garden's entrance, she noticed the Society's collection. Tin, a modest metal container traditionally chained to the gatepost, had vanished entirely. The chain hung loose, its small padlock lying open on the flagstones like a confession. "The collection tin," she announced, her voice carrying the particular dismay of someone discovering that faith in human nature requires constant recalibration. "It's gone!" The members converged on the gatepost with expressions of increasing bewilderment. The chain showed no signs of force. Indeed, it appeared to have been unlocked with considerable care. The metal post bore no scratches or evidence of struggle. "Most peculiar," observed Mr. Peel, examining the mechanism with professional thoroughness. "A common thief would hardly bother with such delicacy. Much easier to cut the chain or wrench the fixture loose." Mrs. Brindle pursed her lips in the manner of someone revising previously held theories. "Perhaps we're dealing with a very considerate sort of criminal, the type who polishes memorial plaques before making off with charitable donations." The irony in her voice was gentle but unmistakable. The Flaxborough Garden Preservation Society had encountered minor mysteries before: missing tools, trampled flower beds, the occasional creative topiary incident, but nothing quite so contradictory as this combination of reverent care and apparent theft. As the afternoon light began to fade and folding chairs were collected, Mrs. Cordwainer made a careful note about contacting the police, not because the matter seemed urgent, she was careful to specify, but because the society had responsibilities regarding irregularities, however benign they might appear. The members dispersed to their respective homes, each carrying their own interpretation of the day's discoveries. By evening, the story would begin its journey through Flaxborough's established communication networks, gathering embellishments and theories with each telling. By 8:30 the following morning, news of the Lancaster Square incident had achieved that particular velocity unique to Flaxborough mysteries, gathering embellishments at each stop while shedding inconvenient details like autumn leaves. Mrs. Cordwainer's telephone call to the police station, carefully phrased as more procedural than urgent, had inadvertently released the story into the town's established communication networks. At Penfold's tea rooms, Mrs. Cora Brindle occupied her customary corner table with the air of someone prepared to hold court. Her burgundy coat, exchanged for practical tweed, suggested serious discussion ahead. She stirred her Darjeeling with surgical precision while addressing two ladies from the bridge club. "Professional memorial vandals," she declared with mournful satisfaction. "They polish before they pilfer. It's their signature. Organized gangs, mark my words. They scout locations, observe routines, then strike under cover of darkness. The violets were merely camouflage, drawing attention from their real purpose." Mrs. Enid Penfold, who managed the tea rooms with an understanding that gossip was as essential as properly warmed teapots, leaned closer with practiced attention. "Such careful criminals we have these days, almost considerate, unlocking rather than breaking chains." "Exactly my point," Mrs. Brindle continued. "Professional courtesy among thieves. They're probably from one of the larger towns. Birmingham, perhaps, or even London. Local criminals wouldn't bother with such refinement." The story's second iteration occurred at the railway station, where Albert Crumb, the porter, whose early rising granted him unofficial authority over dawn observations, shared his intelligence with Station Master Henderson over morning tea. "Saw something myself yesterday morning," Albert announced, settling his considerable frame with purposeful gravity. "Dawn it was, just past 6. Woman in dark clothing, possibly veiled, moving near the memorial garden. Thought it odd at the time. People grieve in their own fashion, but this seemed different. Purposeful, if you take my meaning. Henderson, whose primary concern was the punctual arrival of the 1715 from King's Lynn, nodded absently. Recognize her. Too far away, and the light wasn't proper yet. But she moved like someone who knew exactly where she was going. Mark my words, she had something to do with those violets." Albert's account, based on a glimpse of an elderly lady walking her terrier, had already acquired the dramatic enhancement that transforms mundane observation into significant intelligence. By noon, the Royal George Public House provided the story's third venue. Councillor Tubby Calcraft held informal court from his customary stool, his pint of bitter lending emphasis to each pronouncement. "Gypsies," he declared with the confidence of someone who had never required evidence for his theories. "Saw a caravan near the old mill last week, gone by morning." No respect for property, that lot. The polishing was distraction, trying to look respectable while conducting common theft. Ruby Snipe, the barmaid whose sharp ears missed nothing of consequence, added her observations while polishing glasses with mechanical precision. "My aunt overlooks Lancaster Square from Chandler Street. Says she's noticed lights in some of those empty houses lately. Number 7 particularly. Thought it was street lamp reflections, but now she's reconsidering." "Empty houses don't polish memorial plaques," observed Mr. Terence Whale, insurance representative and collector of pessimistic scenarios. "Suggest someone with keys, someone familiar with the area's history." The afternoon brought additional complexity when Mrs. Violet Thornbury, the town's florist, encountered Mrs. Dorothy Finch at the post office. Professional inquiry revealed information that added another layer to the developing narrative. "Violets, you mentioned? Rather expensive choice for casual decoration," Mrs. Thornbury mused. "I don't stock them regularly, special orders from wholesale market." "Someone's been purchasing them monthly, though, always cash, always requesting memorial quality flowers." "Assumed it was for the cemetery, but perhaps I was mistaken about the location." "Monthly purchases suggest regular commemoration," Mrs. Finch observed, with newcomer's directness. "Someone maintaining a private ritual." "Precisely. Always the same. Specification. Always prompt payment. Never waited for change, which suggests either wealth or careful budgeting." As evening approached, Dr. Wendell Hartley, making rounds at the cottage hospital, mentioned to Nurse Patricia Meadows that he'd recently treated an elderly patient who spoke frequently of family obligations while paying privately to avoid official records. Rather secretive about personal details, he confided. Local address, but reluctant to provide references, paid promptly in cash. Some prefer privacy in medical matters, particularly the older generation with complicated family histories. By dinner time, the various threads had woven themselves into increasingly elaborate theories. The simple mystery of a polished plaque and missing collection tin had evolved into a complex narrative involving professional criminals, veiled strangers, secretive patients, and mysterious lights in supposedly empty houses. Mrs. Cordwainer, reviewing the day's multiplication of facts, found herself contemplating how information transformed itself through repetition. Her telephone rang twice during evening meal, first her sister-in-law seeking additional details, then Mrs. Brindle, wondering if police should be contacted more urgently. "I intend to speak with Inspector Pubright tomorrow morning," Mrs. Cordwainer assured both callers, suspecting the inspector would approach the matter with characteristic patience rather than the dramatic urgency the town seemed eager to embrace. As Flaxborough settled into evening routines, the Memorial Garden mystery had achieved perfect balance between intrigue and respectability, suitable for extended discussion without requiring anyone to take dramatic action. Tomorrow would bring official investigation, but tonight belonged to speculation and the comfortable pleasure of a puzzle that threatened no fundamental assumptions about their quiet town's nature. The memorial bench, meanwhile, continued its silent vigil, retaining whatever secrets lay behind its suspicious shine. Inspector Pubright arrived at Lancaster Square the following morning with the unhurried manner of someone who understood that mysteries revealed themselves through patience rather than urgency. Mrs. Cordwainer awaited him beside the memorial bench, her navy coat suggesting someone who had dressed appropriately for official business, her notebook prepared with the thoroughness of a woman accustomed to keeping accurate records. "Inspector, thank you for coming so promptly," she began, then paused as Purbright's attention focused on the memorial plaque with contemplative interest. "I realize this may seem rather minor, but the society felt obligated to report irregularities." "Quite right," Purbright replied, examining the violets with careful attention. "Tell me about the plaque's previous condition." Mrs. Cordwainer consulted her notes with precision. "Green with verdigris for years, Inspector. My late husband occasionally mentioned the Hartnells. He was a solicitor before retirement, handled several old Flaxborough estates. Said they owned properties around Lancaster Square before the war, but the family simply faded away after the 40s. He knew them personally. Professional acquaintance only. He mentioned they were what he called property people, owned numbers 3, 7 and 11 Lancaster Square. All rather grand in their day, but he always said number 7 was particularly troublesome regarding ownership after the last Hartnell died. Something about missing documentation or distant relatives who never claimed inheritance." She straightened slightly. "Just fragments of old conversation, you understand, but my husband was meticulous about such matters." Purbright made a note, then examined the gatepost where the collection tin had been secured. "The chain suggests methodical removal rather than hasty theft." Precisely what puzzled us most. One expects either vandalism or straightforward larceny, not this combination of reverence and careful unlocking. His next interview took place at Mr. Lionel Peel's modest residence on Chandler Street, where the retired bank manager received him in a sitting room that suggested decades of careful organization. Peel settled into his chair with measured movements, his expression carrying the weight of professional responsibility, compromised. "The collection tin represented our primary maintenance fund," Peel explained, adjusting his spectacles with nervous precision. "I maintained careful records, deposits, expenditures, balance reconciliation, standard banking procedure, even for modest charitable funds." "You mentioned the padlock was opened rather than forced." "Indeed, Inspector. Most puzzling. Anyone with a common key could have managed it, but why such delicacy? Unless—" Peel hesitated, glancing toward his polished desk. "In my banking career, I occasionally encountered situations where funds went temporarily missing, only to reappear later. Dormant accounts, unexpected bequests, temporary appropriations rather than outright theft. People sometimes borrow from funds intending eventual restitution." Purbright allowed this theory to settle. "The Hartnell name, did it appear in such contexts?" Peel's expression grew thoughtful. "Curious you should ask. During my career, we handled several dormant accounts, bearing that name, property-related transactions, inheritance complications. Nothing irregular, you understand. Simply accounts that ceased activity without formal closure. Such situations require delicate handling, particularly when ownership questions arise." The afternoon brought Purbright to Hargreave and Cobsh's, where Eric Hargreave greeted him with professional enthusiasm that seemed slightly strained. The estate agent's office occupied a narrow shopfront that spoke of modest ambitions and careful economy. "The Hartnell properties," Hargreave repeated, consulting files with practiced efficiency. "We manage several Lancaster Square houses, Inspector. Numbers 3, 7 and 11 have been problematic, difficult to let, complicated ownership. Situations. We handle basic maintenance, rates payments, professional responsibilities, even when properties remain unoccupied. Number 7 specifically. Empty since the early 50s, though we maintain it properly. Insurance requirements, you understand." Hargreave's manner suggested someone navigating between professional discretion and official inquiry. "Some property owners prefer privacy, particularly with inherited estates. We receive instructions through solicitors occasionally, maintenance authorizations, rates payments, nothing dramatic." Purbright noted a crescent of soil on Hargreave's jacket cuff. The estate agent followed his glance and made cheerful confession. Attempted garden work at lunchtime. A window planter. Geraniums respond poorly to theatrical enthusiasm, I've discovered. His final inquiry brought him to Tommy Wickham's lodging house on Mill Street. The young man, recently returned from London with artistic ambitions and modest resources, received Pubright in a room decorated with architectural sketches and historical subjects. "I've been documenting Flaxborough's heritage," Tommy explained, his manner combining defensive pride with genuine enthusiasm. "Victorian houses, memorial gardens, period details. There's considerable historical interest if properly researched." "Including Lancaster Square?" "Particularly Lancaster Square." "Fascinating architecture, Inspector. I've been asking questions about local history, who lived where when houses were built. Research for potential publication." Tommy's expression showed genuine puzzlement when Pubright mentioned the Hartnell name. "Can't say I've encountered it, Inspector, though several people seem oddly evasive about specific properties. Number 7 particularly. Everyone agrees it's been empty for years, but no one seems certain about ownership details." As evening approached, Pubright reviewed his notes in the quiet of his office. 3 interviews had revealed more questions than answers, but patterns were emerging. The Hartnell name appeared in various contexts: property ownership, banking, records, estate management, yet no one claimed direct knowledge of living family members. The memorial's careful restoration suggested personal connection rather than random attention, while the collection tin's methodical removal implied someone familiar with the garden's routines. Most intriguingly, the various accounts contained small contradictions about timing, access, a knowledge that suggested not deliberate deception but the careful omissions of people protecting information they weren't entirely certain they should possess. On his desk he placed a note bearing 3 names and a single question that could mean everything or nothing. Who remembers Evangeline? By morning, the Lancaster Square incident had acquired the comfortable shape of a problem with an obvious solution. Sergeant Love arrived at Pubright's office carrying the satisfied expression of someone who had discovered all the necessary pieces arranged in convenient order. "The Wickham fellow, Inspector," Love announced, settling into his chair. With purposeful confidence, everything points in his direction. Young man recently returned from London, living in modest circumstances with artistic pretensions and obvious financial pressures. Pubright continued reviewing his notes from the previous day's interviews, allowing Love to develop his theory without interruption. He's been observed sketching around Lancaster Square for weeks, asking detailed questions about local history and property ownership. Mrs. Beasley confirms she saw him examining the memorial bench, specifically making measurements and detailed drawings. Classic reconnaissance behavior, if you ask me. Love consulted his notebook with professional thoroughness. "Consider the sequence, sir. Memorial polishing suggests someone with artistic sensibilities who might appreciate proper presentation. The careful unlocking of the collection tin indicates familiarity with the garden's security arrangements, which he'd have observed during his sketching sessions." Before Pubright could respond, the telephone provided Councillor Calcraft's inevitable contribution. The councillor's voice carried the hearty authority of someone accustomed to municipal deference. "Inspector Tubby Calcraft here. Trust this memorial business can be wrapped up promptly. The Public Amenities Subcommittee discussed the situation last evening, and we're concerned about negative publicity. Memorial vandalism suggests declining standards that could affect our reputation." "Your particular concern, Councillor?" Pubright inquired mildly. "Swift resolution, Inspector. This Wickham character, unemployed artist type, asking questions about properties, carrying portfolios that could conceal all manner of items. The evidence seems quite clear. Simple prosecution would restore public confidence while demonstrating appropriate police efficiency." Calcraft's tone suggested that civic duty required transforming investigation into conviction with minimal delay. Can't have people thinking our memorial gardens are vulnerable to artistic vagrants with financial difficulties, bad for tourism, bad for property values. After the call ended, Love leaned forward with renewed confidence. The counsellor's not wrong, sir. Wickham admits to being in the garden, claims historical interest, but he also admits needing money. The timing fits perfectly. His explanation for the memorial's condition: says he found it interesting because of its neglected state. Claims it represented how communities forget their own history. Rather convenient, considering someone restored it the very night after his latest sketching session. That afternoon brought Tommy Wickham to the station for what Love termed clarification of movements. The young man entered with nervous courtesy, his portfolio tucked carefully under his arm, his manner suggesting someone uncertain whether cooperation served his interests. "Mr. Wickham," Pubright began, "your sketches show considerable familiarity with the memorial garden's details." Tommy's expression showed genuine puzzlement. "I document what interests me architecturally, Inspector. The memorial caught my attention because of its neglected condition, beautiful craftsmanship left to deteriorate through simple oversight, yet someone recently restored it to original condition. Did they?" Tommy's surprise appeared entirely unfeigned. "I hadn't noticed, Inspector. My last visit was nearly a week ago. I've been working on interior architectural studies since then. Doorways, period fixtures, that sort of thing." Love intervened with practiced skepticism. "You mentioned needing money, Mr. Wickham. Charitable collections represent easy targets. For someone familiar with garden routines, I've never stolen anything in my life," Tommy replied with quiet dignity. "If I were inclined toward theft, I'd hardly begin with a chained collection tin in a public space. Rather defeats the purpose of discretion." Pubright noted the young man's obvious unfamiliarity with bronze maintenance techniques when questioned. Tommy's artistic training involved pencil and paper rather than metal polishing, and his knowledge of memorial restoration proved non-existent. "Your interest in property ownership. Several people mentioned your inquiries about Lancaster Square. Houses?" "Research purposes only, Inspector. I'm particularly fascinated by houses that maintain their original character despite apparent vacancy. Number 7, for instance, beautiful architecture, clearly maintained despite being officially empty. I wondered about the owner's commitment to preservation." As Tommy departed, Love made his final appeal for decisive action. "We could charge him, sir. The evidence supports it, the community expects it, and the counsellor's pushing for resolution." Pubright considered the window where afternoon light revealed dust motes performing their eternal dance. "Mr. Wickham presents an admirably convenient solution, Sergeant. Perhaps too convenient. Sir?" His surprise at learning about the memorial's restoration seemed genuine. His ignorance of bronze polishing techniques was complete. Most significantly, his questions about property ownership were directed toward architectural rather than criminal purposes. Love frowned. "Then what's our next step?" "We resist the charm of obvious solutions," Pubright replied. "Someone in Flaxborough cleans bronze without anxiety and unlocks padlocks without malice. They tend memorial gardens with genuine care and maintain supposedly empty houses with quiet dedication. Mr. Wickham, for all his artistic enthusiasm, lacks both the knowledge and the emotional connection such actions require. So we continue investigating?" "We look for someone who remembers Evangeline Hartnell with more than casual interest," Pubright said. "Someone whose connection to Lancaster Square runs deeper than artistic appreciation or opportunistic theft." Following morning brought Pubright back to Lancaster Square with the patient manner of someone who understood that overlooked details often proved more illuminating than obvious evidence. The memorial garden held the quiet dignity of a place recently tended, its borders showing signs of care that extended beyond the dramatic attention paid to the bronze plaque. He began his examination methodically, noting again the professional quality of the memorial's restoration. The violets, though beginning to show the first signs of autumn's claim, retained their expensive appearance. Moving beyond the immediate vicinity of the bench, Pubright extended his search to the garden's perimeter, where the rose bushes displayed the surgical precision of recent weeding. It was on a particularly thorny stem that he discovered the handkerchief, a delicate piece of lace that seemed oddly out of place among the garden's rougher textures. The fabric was pristine despite its obvious age, carrying the faint but unmistakable scent of lavender water. Not the synthetic fragrance of modern products, but the genuine essence that suggested either expensive taste or old-fashioned preparation methods. What immediately captured his attention was the faded laundry mark embroidered in one corner. E. Hartnell, 7 LSQ. The lettering was precise, professional, suggesting commercial service rather than domestic marking. The handkerchief had been recently laundered, recently used, recently lost. Mrs. Cordwainer appeared along the path with her customary punctuality, her notebook prepared for whatever developments the morning might bring. Pubright showed her the find, watching her expression shift from polite interest to genuine puzzlement. "The daffodil laundry used to mark items like that," she observed, adjusting her spectacles for closer examination. "Closed in 61? Handkerchiefs were still considered essential then. You could judge a person's standards by the quality of their linens. You recall any Hartnells with the initial E?" "Evangeline, naturally, from the memorial. Though there was mention of an Eleanor Hartwell, a cousin, I believe, though family connections become confused over time. My late husband disliked genealogical discussions. He said they encouraged people to make dramatic claims about inheritance." They walked toward the gatepost, where Pubright examined the padlock once more. Its mechanism showed traces of recent polish, the metal bright with careful attention. "Whoever opened this prefers thoroughness to haste," he observed. Miss Maud Beasley materialized with the calculated timing of someone who had been observing from her window. "Left deliberately, I'd say," she pronounced, eyeing the handkerchief with satisfaction. "There have been lights at number 7, you—" "No, little glows as if someone were moving carefully through familiar rooms." "Recently?" Pubright inquired. "Last Wednesday evening, and again the week before. Always brief, always discreet. I heard a cough once, delicate, like someone trying not to disturb the neighbors." Walking past number 7 itself, Pubright noted details that contradicted its supposedly abandoned status. The front garden showed systematic maintenance, weeds removed with professional thoroughness. The brass door knocker bore traces of recent polishing around its edges, and the front gate moved on well-oiled hinges without protest. His final inquiry brought him to Mrs. Thornbury's flower shop, where violets were arranged with the discretion of expensive merchandise. He placed the handkerchief on the counter without ceremony, as if conducting routine business. "You mentioned regular violet purchases, Mrs. Thornbury? Always the same customer?" "Monthly visits," she confirmed, pleased by official attention. 2. Her observations. Cash payment, always requesting memorial-quality flowers. Small hands, quiet voice, the sort of customer who understands what not to ask for. Particular day of the week? Tuesdays, generally, mid-morning. Uses the side entrance, wears gloves. I've never seen her face clearly, not veiled exactly, but arranged for privacy, if you understand my meaning. "Perfectly," Pubright replied, noting how the lavender scent from the handkerchief seemed to complement the shop's floral atmosphere. Back at the station, he placed the handkerchief in a manila envelope, recording its discovery location and condition. Sergeant Love, glancing in hopefully, suggested fingerprint analysis with the enthusiasm of someone loyal to modern investigative methods. We should only discover that it belonged to someone with hands, Pubright replied mildly. And we already know that. The evidence suggested not criminal activity, but rather someone maintaining family obligations with careful discretion. The handkerchief represented a bridge between the forgotten widow of the memorial plaque and someone who refused to allow that forgetting to remain complete. Someone in Flaxborough remembered Evangeline Hartnell with sufficient devotion to tend her memorial regularly, maintain her former residence quietly, and carry handkerchiefs marked with addresses that connected past and present in ways that defied official records. The question had shifted from who committed a crime to who was preserving memories with such dedicated privacy. Purbright's investigation had acquired the patient rhythm of someone following threads that led not toward dramatic revelation, but deeper into Flaxborough's carefully maintained arrangements. The handkerchief with its faded laundry mark suggested connections that extended beyond simple memorial tending into the more complex territory of sustained deception conducted with impeccable manners. His first call brought him to Miss Maud Beasley's cottage, where 37 years of systematic observation had granted her unofficial authority over Lancaster Square's domestic irregularities. She received him in a sitting room that commanded strategic views while maintaining the fiction of casual interest in neighbourhood affairs. "Inspector, I've maintained careful watch over this area since my retirement from the post office," she began, consulting a notebook that rivaled official police records for thoroughness. "Number 7 has shown irregular activity for months. Small lights, brief movements, the sound of careful maintenance, someone with keys, someone familiar with the house's particular requirements. The lights you mentioned? Wednesday evenings usually. Brief illumination, as if someone were moving through familiar rooms without wanting to disturb the neighbours. I've heard a cough occasionally, delicate, restrained. The sound of someone trying not to make noise despite being perfectly entitled. 2. Miss Beasley's observations extended beyond simple surveillance to encompass the broader patterns of Lancaster Square's supposedly quiet existence. Properties that appear empty often aren't, Inspector. People maintain houses for various reasons: inheritance complications, tax considerations, simple privacy preferences. The Hartnell houses have always been managed differently from ordinary rentals. His next inquiry brought him to Mr. Finch's antique establishment, where the proprietor emerged from behind towers of accumulated treasures with the cautious enthusiasm of someone whose business required delicate navigation between legitimate acquisition and awkward questions about provenance. "Hartnell estate items," Finch repeated, consulting ledgers with practiced discretion. "Occasional pieces over the years, nothing dramatic. Small items, personal effects. Victorian jewellery, silver with unusual crests, even some rather fine gardening tools. Always brought through intermediaries, never direct transactions. Recent activity? Last month, actually. Payment in cash transaction conducted through Mr. Hargreave from the estate agents. Said it was routine property management clearing items from storage." Finch's manner suggested someone who had learned not to inquire too deeply into the motivations behind such arrangements. Some families prefer privacy in these matters, particularly when there are questions about rightful ownership or family obligations. The afternoon brought Pubright to Mrs. Violet Thornbury's flower shop, where the scent of fresh blooms complemented the lingering lavender from the handkerchief. Mrs. Thornbury arranged chrysanthemums with practiced efficiency while discussing her mysterious customer. "Always polite, Inspector, very quiet. Wears gloves, usually a scarf arranged for privacy. Never speaks more than necessary. Pays in cash with exact change. Once she asked for long-lasting violets for a special commemoration, but didn't elaborate. Her general manner? Careful, as if accustomed to moving through the world without drawing attention. There's a certain fragility about her movements, despite their precision. the sort of person who has learned to be invisible while maintaining perfect respectability. His final interview of the day brought him to Dr. Wendell Hartley's surgery, where professional discretion created an atmosphere of carefully managed confidentiality. Dr. Hartley received him with the measured caution of someone whose ethical obligations required precise navigation. "Patient confidentiality prevents detailed discussion," Hartley began carefully, "but I can speak generally about treating individuals who prefer private arrangements to avoid official records. Elderly patients usually who speak of family duties while showing signs of considerable stress regarding unfinished obligations. Their general concerns: property maintenance, memorial care, financial arrangements requiring careful attention. The sort of patients who carry emotional burdens that affect physical well-being. They often mention needing to set things right before current arrangements become impossible to maintain." Pubright's final call brought him back to Hargreave & Co., where Eric Hargreave received him with increased nervousness that suggested the investigation's expanding scope was causing professional anxiety. "Inspector, I hope there's no suggestion of irregularity in our property management procedures. We maintain strict professional standards regarding client confidentiality. The antique transactions Mr. Finch mentioned?" "Routine property management," Hargreave replied quickly. "Sometimes estates require gradual liquidation of contents to maintain carrying costs. We facilitate such transactions professionally, ensuring proper documentation." His manner suggested someone walking carefully between professional obligations and personal knowledge he wasn't entirely certain he should possess. The Hartnell properties require particularly sensitive handling, historical significance, complicated ownership questions that have persisted for decades. As evening approached, Pubright reviewed his expanding collection of information in the quiet of his office. The handkerchief had led him to a network of people who possessed fragments of knowledge about someone maintaining the Hartnell legacy through quiet dedication and elaborate privacy. A patient avoiding official medical records, someone selling family items to maintain property expenses, a person purchasing memorial flowers while remaining essentially invisible to casual observation. Each interview had revealed not criminal activity but rather the careful arrangements of someone living deliberately between official existence and practical invisibility. The question was no longer who had committed theft, but rather who was preserving family obligations through such determined discretion that their very existence had become a mystery requiring investigation. Sergeant Love appeared hopefully in the doorway. "Progress, sir." "Yes," Pubright replied mildly. "We now have several people not quite saying what they know because what they know seems too orderly to disturb. The Memorial Garden incident was revealing itself as merely the visible surface of much deeper currents flowing through Flaxborough's quiet arrangements. The fire at Hargreave & Co. announced itself with the modest discretion typical of Flaxborough. Emergencies. A thin ribbon of smoke emerging from the basement window at 11:30 Thursday evening, discovered by Constable Morton during his rounds. By the time the volunteer fire brigade arrived, the flames had accomplished their purpose with surgical precision, consuming only those files containing property records and rate books dating from 1940 to 1955. Eric Hargreave appeared within minutes. His manner combining appropriate distress with curious resignation, as if he had been expecting some form of disruption without knowing precisely what shape it might take. He stood watching smoke emerge from his premises with the expression of someone witnessing the inevitable conclusion of a long-developing situation. "Electrical fault, most likely," he explained to Fire Chief Morrison with professional composure. "Old wiring, accumulated papers. These buildings develop their own ideas about maintenance." Morrison, whose experience with local emergencies had taught him to appreciate coincidence with skepticism, examined the basement with methodical attention. curious how the fire confined itself to the historical records. Electrical faults usually show less discrimination. Inspector Pubright arrived. As the brigade completed their work, noting immediately how the flames had achieved remarkable selectivity, current files remained pristine, modern documentation survived intact, but everything relating to Lancaster Square's ownership history from the war years had been reduced to ash with professional thoroughness. "Convenient timing," Sergeant Love observed, examining the undamaged areas. "Just as we begin investigating Hartnell connections, the relevant records disappear." "Most considerate of the electrical system," Pubright replied mildly, "to spare us the inconvenience of excessive documentation." The basement revealed its secrets reluctantly. Charred fragments suggested ledgers, rate assessments, and correspondence, the bureaucratic archaeology that property lawyers prefer to keep undisturbed. The fire had spared even adjacent papers, displaying the sort of precision that suggested familiarity with filing systems rather than random electrical malice. Hargreaves' anxiety manifested in excessive helpfulness. "Inspector, I hope there's no suggestion of deliberate destruction. We maintain strict professional standards regarding record preservation." "I'm sure you do," Pubright replied, noting how the man's jacket bore fresh traces of garden soil despite his claims of spending the evening reviewing contracts indoors. The second incident revealed itself at dawn when Miss Beasley's systematic surveillance detected unusual activity at No. 7 Lancaster Square. Someone had spent considerable time during the night conducting methodical garden maintenance, planting winter bulbs with professional precision, repairing the front gates, hinges and weeding borders with the sort of attention that suggested intimate familiarity with the property's particular requirements. "Watched from my bedroom window," Miss Beasley reported with satisfaction. "Small figure, moving with complete confidence despite the darkness, used a shaded torch, worked quietly, knew exactly what needed doing, the sort of gardening that requires years of familiarity with soil conditions." The garden work demonstrated remarkable expertise. Winter crocuses had been planted in precise rows, their placement suggesting someone who understood both horticultural principles and the property's drainage patterns. The gate repair involved replacing hinges with hardware that matched the original Victorian ironwork perfectly. "Professional quality work," observed Mr. Peel when Pubright brought him to examine the results. "Whoever did this understands both gardening and period restoration. Those hinges must have cost considerable money. The transformation was too complete, too precise, to represent casual attention. It spoke of purposeful intent of someone with deep understanding of the property's needs. The care exhibited matched the memorial plaque's careful restoration, reverence for the past, combined with desire for proper maintenance. Tommy Wickham's alibi for both incidents proved unassailable. Sergeant Baines had detained him for sketching after dark near the railway bridge, keeping him in custody until dawn for questioning about vagrancy. His involvement in either the fire or garden work became impossible. "Rather eliminates our obvious suspect," Love observed with disappointment. "Mr. Wickham continues to demonstrate admirable innocence," Pubright replied. "It must be becoming quite habitual for him." The precision of both incidents suggested careful planning rather than opportunistic activity. The fire had eliminated specific historical records while leaving current business intact. The garden work demonstrated intimate knowledge of the property's requirements and access to expensive materials. Neither incident showed signs of haste or anxiety. Mrs. Cordwainer, reviewing these developments, provided context that connected the incidents to broader patterns. "My late husband always said property law created more secrets than crime ever managed. People maintain arrangements for decades, avoiding official attention while conducting perfectly legal activities through elaborate privacy." Dr. Hartley, encountered during evening rounds, added medical perspective. "Patients who carry long-term emotional burdens often reach crisis points where maintaining their arrangements becomes impossible. They begin taking risks they previously avoided. As evening settled over Flaxborough, Pubright considered how the incidents had shifted the investigation's focus. The fire suggested someone with access to Hargreaves' premises who understood which records posed potential problems. The garden work indicated someone who had been maintaining number 7 Lancaster Square for years while allowing the town to believe it remained empty. The combination pointed towards someone whose elaborate privacy arrangements were requiring increasingly dramatic maintenance as official attention increased, not criminal activity, but careful management of a situation that had grown too complex for simple discretion to sustain. "We're looking for someone," Pubright told Love, "who has spent years perfecting the art of remaining invisible while conducting perfectly visible activities. Someone who oils hinges with the same dedication they apply to polishing memorial plaques." The mystery was revealing itself as a question not of criminal intent, but of someone whose devotion to family obligations had created a parallel existence, requiring increasingly elaborate maintenance to preserve. Evening settled over Flaxborough with its customary discretion, and Inspector Pubright welcomed it into his study with the satisfaction of someone whose day had provided illumination rather than mere information. The desk lamp cast its familiar circle across his notes, transforming scattered observations into patterns that suggested not criminal conspiracy, but something far more intriguing: the elaborate maintenance of family duty conducted with such a determined privacy that it had become indistinguishable from mystery. He considered first the peculiar nature of the incidents themselves. Memorial restoration hardly constituted vandalism, regardless of official terminology. The careful unlocking of collection tins suggested temporary appropriation rather than theft, particularly when the perpetrator had taken obvious care not to damage the mechanism. Even the fire at Hargreave and Comer's displayed surgical precision, eliminating specific problems while leaving current business intact. These were not the actions of someone driven by malice or desperation, but rather the careful adjustments of someone maintaining a complex arrangement that had grown too unwieldy. For simple discretion to sustain, the psychology fascinated him more than the legality. Someone in Flaxborough had spent years, possibly decades, preserving family obligations through elaborate invisibility. They tended memorial gardens with genuine devotion, maintained properties with professional competence, and conducted financial transactions with scrupulous attention to eventual restitution. Their activities suggested not criminal intent, but rather the complex emotional landscape of someone carrying burdens that official society couldn't comfortably accommodate. Small towns, Pubright reflected, were natural collaborators in such arrangements. Flaxborough had perfected the art of knowing without acknowledging, of seeing without staring. An empty house might be maintained to avoid inheritance complications while providing someone with unofficial residence. A forgotten memorial might receive care from someone whose connection to the deceased transcended legal recognition. Charitable collections might be temporarily borrowed by someone whose need was genuine but whose circumstances required discretion that official channels couldn't provide. The handkerchief with its faded laundry mark represented the key to understanding the entire situation. E. Hartnell, 7 Elliscute, suggested not historical sentiment but current practical need. Someone was living at number 7 Lancaster Square while allowing the town to believe the property remained empty, maintaining this fiction through careful attention to community assumptions and bureaucratic oversight. The lavender scent spoke of someone who had learned that sorrow should be tidy, that duty could be discharged through private ritual rather than public recognition. Such arrangements required remarkable dedication to detail. The person would need legitimate access to multiple properties, sufficient resources to maintain them while avoiding official scrutiny, and the sort of comprehensive local knowledge that came only from years of careful observation. They would require expertise in memorial maintenance, horticultural skill, and familiarity with local business practices that allowed necessary transactions to be conducted through cooperative intermediaries. Most significantly, they would need the emotional commitment that sustained decades of careful invisibility in service of family memory. Not the desperate concealment of criminal activity, but the patient dedication of someone preserving connections that society had forgotten or never properly recognized. The difference between legal ownership and emotional possession often created such situations where official records failed to accommodate the full complexity of human obligation. The fire at Hargreave and Cobus represented a crisis point in these arrangements. Someone had realized that official investigation might uncover documentation of their legitimate but complicated claim to the Hartnell properties. Rather than face questions about inheritance, residence, or financial arrangements that might force them into unwanted official existence, they had eliminated the records that could compromise their carefully maintained privacy. The garden work at number 7 revealed the depth of their connection to the property. They knew its drainage patterns, seasonal requirements, and architectural details with the intimacy of genuine residents. This wasn't casual maintenance, but the loving attention of someone who considered the house genuinely home, regardless of what official documentation might suggest about legal ownership or current occupancy. Their mistake had been allowing sentiment to overcome caution. The memorial plaque's restoration and violet offerings represented emotional needs that their elaborate privacy couldn't entirely suppress. They had maintained Evangeline Hartnell's memory with such devotion that eventually their activities attracted the sort of attention their entire arrangement was designed to avoid. Pubright recognized that his investigation had revealed not criminal activity, but one of those human situations that defied easy categorization. Someone whose life existed in the spaces between official recognition and practical necessity, who had created sustainable existence through careful attention to community, assumptions and bureaucratic blind spots. They had committed the peculiarly English crime of being too considerate to announce themselves properly. The mystery lay not in discovering who had committed crimes, but in comprehending why someone had chosen to live so carefully between visibility and invisibility that their very existence had become a puzzle requiring official attention to solve. Tomorrow would bring the delicate task of drawing this careful person into conversation without destroying the elaborate privacy that had sustained them through what must have been many lonely years of devoted service to family memory. He closed his notebook with the gentle satisfaction of someone who had solved a mystery by understanding rather than exposing it. Inspector Pubright arranged his gathering with the methodical care of someone setting a mousetrap in a drawing room. The mechanism must be precise, but the cheese should be served on proper china. The Lancaster Square Memorial Garden provided the perfect venue, its restored bronze plaque gleaming in the afternoon light like evidence of someone's devoted attention to detail. Mrs. Cordwainer had responded to his suggestion with characteristic efficiency, assembling what she termed interested parties for educational discussion of memorial maintenance. The folding chairs formed a companionable semicircle around the memorial bench, while a card table bore the essential accompaniments of civilized discourse, tea service, digestive biscuits, and the comfortable fiction that this was merely a social gathering. The attendees represented Flaxborough's established networks of information and influence. Mrs. Brindle occupied her chair with the authority of someone accustomed to chairing committees. Mr. Peel consulted his notebook with banking precision. Miss Beasley maintained her customary surveillance posture, though her usual satisfaction seemed tempered by uncharacteristic anxiety. Eric Hargreave lingered at the gathering's periphery, his manner suggesting someone prepared for flight, despite his professional obligations to appear cooperative. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pubright began with gentle formality, "thank you for joining this discussion of proper memorial care. Someone has demonstrated admirable expertise in bronze restoration, and we thought the community might benefit from understanding such techniques." Mrs. Cordwainer nodded approvingly. "The improvement has been remarkable, Inspector. One hardly recognizes the memorial as the same neglected plaque we discovered last week." "Indeed," Pubright continued, producing a manila envelope with deliberate ceremony. "Our investigation has uncovered several interesting details. This handkerchief, discovered among the rose bushes, bears a laundry mark from the old Daffodil Laundry, E. Hartnell, 7L Turns. The effect rippled through the assembled group with the subtle precision of stones dropped in still water. Mr. Peel's pen stopped moving. Miss Beasley's notebook closed with unusual quietness. Hargreaves' attention shifted from the memorial to the middle distance, as if calculating routes of retreat. "The Daffodil Laundry maintained excellent records," Pubright observed mildly. "Their books indicate service continuing even after official closure, suggesting a former employee provided discreet laundry service for a single, long-standing client. We expect to identify this person quite soon." Mrs. Thornbury, arriving with a fresh arrangement of chrysanthemums, added her professional perspective. "Someone has been purchasing memorial-quality violets regularly, Inspector. Always cash payment, always requesting flowers suitable for commemorative purposes." "Most illuminating," Pubright replied. "Which brings us to administrative matters. Properties listed as vacant but showing signs of active maintenance, polished brass, systematic gardening, occasional illumination, now require formal reassessment by the Council and Inland Revenue. Number 7, Lancaster Square, specifically, will be subject to immediate review regarding current occupancy." Hargreaves stepped forward with professional anxiety. "Inspector, client confidentiality requires—" "Quite right, Mr. Hargreave," Pubright interrupted gently. "However, bank records indicate that charitable donations require verification of identity for tax purposes. Mr. Peel, your experience with such administrative requirements?" Peel adjusted his spectacles with trembling precision. "Certainly. Inspector, substantial donations trigger automatic review, particularly when made through unusual payment methods or intermediaries." "Exactly," Pubright continued, pouring tea with ceremonial attention. "We anticipate interviewing the current resident of number 7 Lancaster Square tomorrow evening. Professional courtesy, naturally. Understanding rather than prosecution. For someone who has clearly maintained family obligations with such devoted care." The silence that followed carried the weight of recognition. Dr. Hartley, making his promised appearance, added medical perspective with careful discretion. "Patients who carry long-term emotional burdens often reach crisis points where maintaining elaborate privacy becomes impossible. They require understanding rather than official scrutiny." As Pubright distributed teacups, his attention focused on a small, neat figure seated at the gathering's edge, an elderly woman whose gloves, modest grey hat, and carefully arranged scarf suggested someone accustomed to moving through the world without attracting attention. She accepted her cup with hands that trembled slightly before steadying with obvious effort. "You are very kind," she said quietly, her voice carrying the refined accent of someone educated in an earlier era. "Flaxborough generally is," Pubright replied, placing a single violet, borrowed from Mrs. Thornbury's arrangement, beside her. Saucer. "We prefer conversation to confrontation, understanding to exposure." The woman regarded the violet with the expression of someone recognizing a familiar ritual. When she lifted her eyes, they held the courage of someone preparing to settle. "A long-deferred account. If one wished to return something," she asked carefully, "should it be here or elsewhere?" "Wherever you would be most comfortable," Pubright assured her. "The vicarage often provides suitable privacy for such discussions. The important thing is that nothing important be damaged in the process." As the gathering dispersed, each participant carried their own understanding of what tomorrow would bring. The memorial garden mystery would be resolved through compassion rather than prosecution, recognition rather than exposure. Miss Beasley lingered briefly, her usual confidence replaced by genuine concern. "Inspector, you'll be gentle? Some people have carried family burdens longer than anyone should manage alone." "Very gentle indeed," Pubright confirmed, watching the small figure disappear along the path toward Lancaster Square, where number 7 awaited its long-anticipated conversation. The vicarage sitting room possessed that particular quality of ecclesiastical comfort that made confession seem less like surrender than like setting down a burden too long carried. Inspector Pubright had arranged the chairs with deliberate informality, a circle that suggested conversation rather than interrogation. The afternoon light, filtered through lace curtains that had witnessed decades of human frailty, addressed with patient understanding, fell gently on the small gathering he had assembled. Miss Eleanor Hartwell, for she had quietly provided her name upon arrival, occupied the chair nearest the window with the composed dignity of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment while hoping it might never come. Her grey dress and carefully arranged scarf spoke of someone who understood that respectability required constant attention to detail. Mrs. Cordwainer sat with notebook prepared, lending the gathering the comfortable authority of proper documentation. Mr. Peel had been invited as someone whose banking experience granted him understanding of financial complexities that defied simple categorization. "Miss Hartwell," Pubright began with gentle formality, "we're hoping to understand rather than prosecute. Your devotion to family memory has been evident throughout our investigation." She smiled with genuine warmth, the expression transforming her careful features into something approaching relief. "Inspector, I believe the time has come to explain arrangements that have perhaps grown too complicated for simple discretion to sustain." "The memorial plaque honors Evangeline Hartnell, beloved widow," Pubright observed, "but it doesn't mention that she was your great-aunt, or that number 7 Lancaster Square, supposedly vacant for decades, has been your home since 1949. Mrs. Cordwainer's pencil paused above her notebook. Mr. Peel adjusted his spectacles with the careful attention of someone recalculating fundamental assumptions. "Evangeline raised me after my parents died in the war," Eleanor explained, her voice carrying the refined precision of someone educated when such things mattered. "When she passed in 1943, the inheritance became complicated. Death duties, distant relatives who might challenge claims, legal documentation disrupted by wartime conditions. Rather than risk losing the properties through official proceedings, I simply moved into number 7 and began the quiet work of preservation. The banking records Mr. Peel mentioned, dormant accounts bearing the Hartnell name. My inheritance, such as it was. Small amounts, accumulated over decades. I used them to maintain the properties, pay rates through intermediaries, preserve family memory. When funds ran short, I occasionally borrowed from various charitable collections, always intending restitution, but never quite managing the full amounts." Eleanor's confession emerged with the practiced precision of someone who had rehearsed it through many sleepless nights. She had discovered that official recognition posed greater risks than careful invisibility. Eric Hargreave had provided professional services without inquiring too deeply into legal complexities, managing the fiction of vacancy while facilitating necessary maintenance. "The memorial restoration?" Pubright inquired. "Monthly ritual, Inspector. Evangeline taught me that family memory requires active preservation. I've purchased violets from Mrs. Thornbury for years, maintained the bronze plaque when weather permitted. Recently, the neglect had become too painful to ignore. And the collection tin incident, Eleanor's composure wavered slightly. I had calculated the total borrowed from various charitable funds over the years, nearly £40, accumulated through small appropriations when property expenses exceeded my modest resources. I took the collection tin intending to count its contents and provide full restitution for all my borrowings. Mr. Peel leaned forward with professional interest. The fire at Hargreave & Co. My panic, Inspector. When young Mr. Wickham began asking detailed questions about property ownership, I realized official investigation might uncover documentation of my residence. The rate books from the 40s contained records that could complicate my situation. I used my emergency key to Mr. Hargreave's premises and eliminated the problematic files. Eric Hargreave, who had been summoned to provide his own account, shifted uncomfortably in the doorway. Inspector, I should clarify my role. I've known of Miss Hartwell's residence for years. Professional discretion seemed appropriate. The commission for managing supposedly vacant properties was modest, and her situation appeared harmless, until official scrutiny threatened to expose arrangements that served everyone's interests, Pubright observed mildly. Precisely. The fire was regrettable, but preservation of client confidentiality sometimes requires creative solutions. Mrs. Cordwainer made careful notes, her expression combining disapproval of irregular methods with understanding of emotional motivations. The garden work at number 7? Evidence of genuine residence, Eleanor replied. I've maintained those. Borders for decades, Inspector. The recent attention meant I could no longer trust others with work I'd always done myself. Pubright considered the afternoon light, noting how it illuminated dust motes that danced with the same patient persistence Eleanor had shown in maintaining her elaborate arrangements. Your current situation requires regularization, Miss Hartwell, not prosecution, but proper legal recognition of your claim to the property. I understand, Inspector. I had hoped to continue indefinitely, but recent attention has made such privacy impossible to sustain. Mr. Peel offered practical perspective with banking precision. Inheritance complications from the war years often resolve favorably when properly documented. Your years of property maintenance demonstrate legitimate claim, regardless of formal documentation gaps. The afternoon concluded with arrangements that satisfied both legal requirements and human understanding. Eleanor's situation would be regularized through proper channels, her small debts to charitable funds settled through restitution she had already prepared. The mystery of the forgotten widow would be resolved through recognition rather than prosecution. Inspector, Eleanor said as they prepared to leave, you have been extraordinarily kind. I expected judgment rather than assistance. Flaxborough generally prefers conversation to confrontation, Pubright replied. Your devotion to family memory deserves recognition rather than censure. The Memorial Garden incident had revealed not criminal activity, but one of those human situations that defied easy categorization, someone whose elaborate privacy had become a mystery requiring understanding rather than prosecution to resolve. The week after the vicarage meeting unfolded with a tidiness that suggested Flaxborough had decided collectively to restore its furniture to familiar places. Miss Eleanor Hartwell visited the council offices accompanied by Mr. Peel, who supplied the sort of paperwork that mollifies official anxieties. She signed forms with steady hand and faint amusement, as if acknowledging that visibility, properly arranged, could be almost as comfortable as secrecy. The society's collection tin reappeared at Mrs. Cordwainer's door, its padlock polished and its coins increased by crisp notes. Inside lay a folded list, meticulously itemizing borrowings and interest, ending with thanks. At the garden. Preservation Society, there was an emergency committee meeting, which in practice meant tea and the opportunity to phrase relief as administrative diligence. Mrs. Brindle suggested a small plaque acknowledging generous anonymous benefactors, but Mrs. Cordwainer observed that anonymity had, for once, been properly replaced by a name in neat block capitals at the council office. Tommy Wickham, invited as a historical consultant, produced a sketch of the memorial bench whose accuracy offended nobody's memory. The society resolved with quiet satisfaction to commission him to draw Lancaster Square's principal houses, that posterity might possess what residents only recalled. Councillor Calcraft, apprised that scandal had declined into narrative, found magnanimity conveniently thrifty. He addressed the Public Amenities Subcommittee with a speech about heritage stewardship that bore traces of overnight editing. The councillor deplored irregular record-keeping of the 1940s without identifying culprits and praised responsible citizens who, though misguided, acted from filial piety. Ruby Snipe, relaying the meeting at the Royal George, remarked that Mr. Calcraft's ardour for swift justice had been mislaid somewhere between the third paragraph and the whipped cream on his trifle. No one contradicted her. Prudence is rarely more eloquent than desert on that occasion. Eric Hargreave bore his inquisition with the look of a man who has discovered that being helpful can be fatiguing when performed under oath. Insurers, affronted by coincidence, sent letters whose politeness bruised harder than accusations, so the Shaw firm's basement acquired new wiring, smoke detectors, and a notice forbidding the storage of combustible narratives near legitimate files. Privately, Pubright suggested that confidentiality, properly understood, rarely needed flames. Hargreave agreed with such energy that one feared for his arteries. Thereafter, he cultivated a judicious ignorance that pleased his clients and simplified his conscience, two domains that had previously enjoyed separate calendars entirely. Miss Beasley, whose vigilance had long served as the Square's unofficial alarm system, found herself unexpectedly unemployed. Visibility, once her quarry, had declared itself and filled in the appropriate forms. She responded characteristically by refining her watchfulness. Now she tracked smaller disturbances improperly, folded milk bills, leaflets thrust into respectable letterboxes, and a prowling tomcat with libertine whiskers. One afternoon a small parcel appeared on her window ledge, lavender water, discreetly wrapped, without a card. The gift obliged her to acknowledge that observation may be, in its way, companionable. That evening she left her curtains marginally, apart, as if in thanks. Business altered in gentle increments. Mrs. Thornbury began packing a monthly posy for Miss Hartwell that contained something cheerful alongside the violets. She found that living arrangements thrive on colour. Dr. Hartley observed that a patient's cough had diminished once conversation replaced secrecy, and prescribed a tonic, chiefly as an excuse for calling to ensure the improvement continued. Even the council cash office felt the change, for Miss Hartwell queued stoically with householders paying rates, measuring patience against the clock that ticked loud as civic duty. She kept her place like an old soldier, and the clerks learned her name. Number 7 itself shed its furtiveness with a series of domestic gestures. The curtains, once arranged to admit only enough light for stealth, settled into a franker symmetry. The brass knocker shone not as a dare, but as welcome. Children, passed by on errands, gazed at the narrow border of crocuses planning their spring, and were not shooed away. One evening, Pubright met Eleanor at the gate and walked with her to the memorial garden. She regarded the bronze with unembarrassed affection and smiled at the violets. "It is odd," she said, "how public remembrance improves when someone remembers privately." Tommy Wickham, now securely categorized as an artist with a commission, discovered that legitimacy is an art in itself. He consulted maps, interviewed elders with sketchbooks open, and added chimney pots with loving exactitude. His drawing of number 11 achieved such popularity that a print hangs behind the bar at the Royal George, flanked by ruby-red bottles, that approve any enterprise which increases the evening's takings. Tommy thanked Inspector Pubright earnestly, to the inspector's embarrassment. "You drew yourself out of trouble," Pubright said. "All I did was avoid stepping on your pencils." Tommy laughed and, for once, believed it entirely. The collection tin resumed its guardianship of the gatepost with a chain that now seemed ceremonial rather than protective. Contributions increased as guilt and relief wore the face of generosity. Mr. Peel balanced the accounts with the appetite of a man rediscovering an old, agreeable puzzle. He found that the figures, like law-abiding sheep, returned obligingly to their pen. He locked the new ledger with an expression almost playful. "Honesty," he told Mrs. Cordwainer, "is most satisfying after a little arithmetic." She permitted herself a smile that admitted both the truth and the pleasure of hearing it expressed neatly. For Pubright, the case concluded not with triumph, but with a tidying of drawers. There were reports to file that declined to dramatize, a memorandum advising against future bonfires of documentation, and a short note to the superintendent defining compassion as a practical economy. He returned the handkerchief to Eleanor with a bow. She accepted it with the gravity appropriate to an heirloom recovered from a rosebush. Later, in his office, the afternoon sun persuaded dust to dance above the blotter while Sergeant Love enumerated smaller perplexities. The inspector listened, making notes as calm as footprints across a lawn.